Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Whether it's spring planting, fall harvesting, or just a drive across the state, soy biodiesel helps a diesel-powered engine operate in a demanding job. Soybean oil from Nebraska soybeans makes biodiesel a renewable fuel that's also environmentally responsible. The soybean checkoff plays a major role in supporting the use and availability of biodiesel. The Nebraska Soybean Board, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith looks at selling strategies for corn and soybeans. We show you why Japan is a critical market for Nebraska's pork and beef, and Nathan Mueller explains how flooded or waterlogged fields could impact corn and soybeans. After such a positive stretch putting crops in the ground last week, some Nebraska farmers can no longer see dirt. Heavy rains Wednesday night drowned fields in southeast Nebraska. We'll talk about resulting problems to plants below water later in the show. Roy Smith is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. U.S. farmers are now midway through planting this year's corn crop. The latest progress report shows growers have put 55% of their corn in the ground, along with 13% of their soybeans. Nebraska's farmers have planted 57% of their corn and 12% of their soybeans. Iowa's producers, meanwhile, used last week to sow over half of their corn crop. The increase of 54 points was the biggest jump in the nation. Uncharacteristically, Minnesota leads the nation in corn planting progress with 83% finished. We talked with Roy Wednesday afternoon and started by asking for an update on planting progress and moisture conditions in his area of Plattsmouth, Nebraska.
Well, first of all, planting is going along real fast. We've had some nice days, we've had some moisture, but no big floods or no extended periods. And with the size of planter equipment that we have these days, you don't have to spend very many hours in the field to get a lot done. Moisture-wise, we've been getting rain just right along, nothing really gully washing, and so we've had some time in between the rains to get the crops planted, and I'd say that most of the growing conditions look pretty good right now in Cass County.
To get an update on where we've been since we last talked, you've now sold out of old crop soybeans. What was your thought process doing it?
Well, the thought process was that normally I have what I call a drop dead date of December 31st. I want all my soybeans sold. The last 3 years, there's been a little rally in the spring that would give you maybe a few pennies more if you had some beans to sell. So I held back 20% of my 2014 crop of soybeans to see if in fact we would get a rally, and we did, and it was enough to make storing beans on the farm a paying proposition if you don't mind scooping beans to get the bins cleaned out. And so I say that dead cat bounce strategy works very well in most years. We left a few pennies on the table in 2014 just because the market went up quite a bit. Now, it didn't get to where most people wanted it to because a lot of people had to target a $10 cash, and we didn't get that.
Where are you in your corn sales for old crop?
Old crop corn sales, I'm about 80% done, and as we speak here today, I've been hauling corn this last 10 days, and I want to have all the corn sold and hopefully moved within a couple of weeks.
Because?
It's just that if you look at the seasonal price trend charts on corn and beans both, there's a window there where there's some risk premium bid into the price. I say the normal window is April 1st to May 15th, or April 1st to May 15th, or April 15th to May 15th. Kind of depends on how your work schedule works, but that's a real good time to set some targets and get something moved, because once the crop is in the ground, then your risk premium starts to fade away, and so does the price.
Are you already looking, or should farmers already be looking at your drop dead date in July?
I think so. In fact, I'm not so sure, but what my drop dead date might be a little earlier than the 4th of July, simply because, you know, as I've talked to people in different locations, and particularly Commodity Classic down in Phoenix, boy, there's just a lot of corn left in bins. And you know, I have this little saying, you don't want to store past the 1st of July, because you become a victim of agricultural acupuncture. That's getting stuck with last year's crop. And that happened to people in 2013 with that crop, and it's probably going to happen again with the 2014 crop. And the way to avoid that is, this is ideal time to be making sell something.
In the new crop, is there anything that you see that would make you lean towards trying to sell? Or I guess, how would you advise farmers to start thinking about that?
Well, first of all, there's been some general feeling for quite a while that because of the expense of planting, farmers are going to plant fewer, or going to plant more soybeans and less corn. And personally, I don't think that'll happen. We talk about that every year, and very seldom does it happen. But I would say the fact that that idea is prevailing in the trade may mean that we're going to get a nice little rally along here somewhere. Now, where would that be? One possibility is a normal seasonal high in the middle of June. Another one is the possibility of August, that there'll be a little bit of a surprise because of who knows what, some kind of weather phenomenon or something. But there's always a chance for a rally when you don't expect it, and that would be the time that you want to have the finger on the trigger to make new crop sales.
The USDA will release its May crop report on Tuesday. John Moret from J.E. Moret Grain Company will join us to analyze how corn and soybean markets reacted to the agency's latest estimates on next week's episode. There are many important countries for Nebraska's agricultural producers, but if you raise beef or pork in this state, no nation plays a bigger role than Japan. Slightly smaller than California, but with more than 3 times the population, Japan's limited agricultural production leads it to import 60% of its food. In Nebraska, that results in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of ag exports and additional value for the state's cattle and hogs.
Not only is Japan the most valuable meat importing country in the world, but it's also the 4th largest market for U.S. agriculture as a whole. With more than $13 billion worth of ag products sent to Japan in 2014, the U.S. is its largest supplier.
The per capita consumption of Japanese consumers of American agricultural products is very high. If you compare it to other countries, the Japanese per person consumes about $115 a year per person of American agricultural products. You compare that to China, it's about $18 per person.
Japan's 127 million people consume on average about 1,000 calories less per day than an American. When factoring in the higher cost of living in Japan, income per person is about 70 to 80% of that in the U.S. But because of food prices and the desire for higher quality, the USDA says Japanese consumers spend more of their income on food than the typical American. At the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, Minister Counselor for Agricultural Affairs David Mueller says often those consumers are eating outside the home where they have plenty of options.
People are eating meals away from home as much now as at any time. Japan is a real food service industry, and people love to go to restaurants, and there's more restaurants per person here. There's twice as many restaurants per person here as there are in the United States, because people love to eat.
What they eat has also been changing. The U.S. Meat Export Federation, or USMEF, says seafood consumption has been declining in Japan. It believes that category will fall 9% between 2014 and 2023, while beef consumption will rise 4% during that period and pork consumption will increase 1%. Japan imports about as much pork as it produces. It relies on other countries for beef, primarily Australia and the United States. As the largest producer of red meat in the U.S., Nebraska's farmers and ranchers send more of their pork and more of their beef to Japan than any other country in the world. Those were valued at more than $500 million in 2014. In the case of pork, they send 3.5 times more meat to Japan than their second biggest international buyer. While those exports are among the most valuable they've ever been, U.S. beef shipments are not. In 2003, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, was confirmed in the United States, shutting down the market to Japan and increasing concerns from consumers about where their meat comes from.
As a country, we experienced the BSE case back in 2001, September 2001, and at that time, the traceability has been a big issue because everybody was just wondering where this beef that we are eating right now is coming from. And then after that, unfortunately, back in 2003, we got another case of BSE in the U.S., and similar thing has happened. So that since then, traceability has been a very, very big issue especially for beef.
When the market reopened for good in 2006, Australia had taken a huge share. It still occupies that space as 52% of Japan's beef imports come from there, with nearly 38% coming from the U.S. When Japan reopened its borders to U.S. beef, it did so only to meat from cattle less than 21 months of age. But in February 2013, Japan announced it would allow U.S. beef from animals less than 30 months old. That year, the value of beef and beef product exports from Nebraska to Japan increased by more than $100 million. For Cargill, which operates slaughter plants in the U.S., including one in Schuyler, the expanded age made a huge difference.
When we had an age restriction age 21 months or under, I say about only 15% of the total kill that we are processing in our plants are available for this market. But change it to 30 months or under, it went up to 95%.
One of the benefits of the Japanese market is buyers don't just want steaks, burgers, and pork chops. USMEF in Japan says many cuts there receive an exceptional premium over what they could command in the States or in other countries.
Example, a beef tongue and short plate and the pork loins and butts. Japan is strong and consistent demand for these items increases carcass value and boost the profitability of U.S. livestock producers.
USMEF says beef tongue might sell for $1 a pound in the U.S., but it could go for 5 times that amount in Japan. Nebraska alone sent $16 million worth of frozen beef tongue to Japan in 2014. Marubeni imports more than 50,000 tons of meats each year and says this is a benefit to buying meat from the U.S. rather than Australia.
We have to buy everything when we import Aussie beef. For example, we want to have only loin. However, we have to have everything from Australia. But in the United States, we can purchase the item, whatever we want. So that's a big difference. We need a belly, for example, but we can buy only belly from United States. But from Australia, we have to buy everything, other products too, which we don't need.
Both Marubeni and Cargill say Japanese consumers prefer grain-fed beef to grass-fed, which comes mostly from Australia. Even within the U.S., Cargill's Tatsuo Ishii says buyers know the difference between cattle in Nebraska and that in the southern part of the U.S.
Because maybe traditionally it's a cattle type, somewhat different from the one in the Texas or South. And also, at least the people in the market understand that the feeders in Nebraska is relatively small, so that the customers' image to those small feeders is that the owner of the feeders takes a better care on the cattle, which may be right, may be wrong. I don't know. But that's the image.
Nearly every group and company we spoke with in Japan says this is a key to this market. Customers want to know where their food comes from and that it's safe and reliable.
What do you think is important for the American farmer to know about the Japanese market or its consumers?
I think the most important thing to know is that Japanese consumers are very devoted purchasers of American agricultural products. They're very dedicated to sticking with people that they know and whom they've built a relationship with.
Securing the Japanese market for Nebraska meats isn't only valuable to the state's pork and beef sectors. 16% of Nebraska's corn is fed directly to livestock in the state, and nearly 600,000 tons of soybean meal is used in Nebraska's animal agriculture. If American producers can continue to ensure the high quality important to Japan's consumers, the USDA believes this country will continue to be an excellent partner into the future.
Everybody's excited about China, but this is a group of people that have been buying American agricultural products for many years, and they will continue into the future. So the old, dance with who brung ya is important for this market, and it will pay off well for U.S. agricultural producers to continue to put resources and interest and sending high quality product to Japan.
There are hurdles the U.S. must face with Japan in its meat trade. For example, U.S. beef faces a tariff of 38.5%. In 2 weeks, we'll look at how the Trans-Pacific Partnership could change those barriers. Next week, we'll see how Japan uses the corn and soybeans it imports from the U.S. Meat exports were down sharply last month, with noticeable exceptions to certain countries. U.S. beef and veal shipments were down more than 6.5% from March 2014, yet Japan, the leading importer, brought in 9% more beef. Pork exports for March were down nearly 9% from a year ago, although the biggest buyer for those products was also higher. Mexico increased its imports of U.S. pork by more than 26%. The May Nebraska farmer says finding and keeping good employees on the farm has always been a challenge. This month's issue says several Nebraska feedlots have found a good recipe for locating, hiring, and retaining long-term employees, including Weborg Feeding Company at Pender. This includes knowing what to look for in employees in terms of experience, skills, and attitude. To learn more about Weborg Feeding Company and its strategies for finding and keeping good employees, you can check out the May issue of Nebraska Farmer. Big storms with sustained rainfall moved through Nebraska Wednesday night into early Thursday. The National Weather Service tallied total rainfall up to 10 inches in some parts. Corn and soybeans that had been planted now sit under inches of water, leading to problems with oxygen, disease, and eventually crusting. Thursday morning, we talked with Nebraska Extension's Nathan Mueller near Wahoo to learn more about the issues now facing these fields.
With about 57% of the corn crop in and 9% emerged and now even 12% of the soybeans in, the main question farmers have is when we get these big rains, we had about 4 inches here in Saunders County, is how long can that crop last under ponded or saturated conditions? And like you said, the main thing is oxygen. So there's several factors that are going to affect that. The main thing is probably temperature. It's pretty warm here today after this event. That's not going to help us out. Generally, germinating seeds, corn seeds, and emerged corn plants that are small, you have about 2 to 4 days, and as it's warmer, it's going to inch towards more of that 2-day side. So as we get, if this water stays here for 2 days, we're going to start to see some decrease in our final stand that we're going to get. And as that period increases, we run the risk that some of these areas are going to have to be replanted.
What are the oxygen problems that plants either above ground or below ground have?
Yes, so germinating seeds are ones that have just emerged. They really have to get their oxygen from the soil, right? So that's the main thing. Even if it's not ponded but saturated, they still can't get the oxygen they need. Now emerged plants, where corn plants are maybe 2 inches tall, some oxygen can diffuse from the shoot down to the root. So that will help increase the survival a little bit. But again, depending on how deep your water is, our corn crop really is not tall enough probably to handle some of the water that's sitting in fields.
How long before it's a problem? As in, how long can it stay below not getting oxygen?
Yeah, about 2 to 4 days without oxygen, we're going to start to lose plants. Soybeans during the germination process is even more sensitive. Even 48 hours of flooding, we're going to start to see some fairly significant decreases in germination and final plant population. There's been probably less studies done on soybeans, but the one that they've done have shown that they're pretty sensitive early on. Now, if we had soybeans that were V2 to V3 stage, 2 to 3 trifoliates, they can actually survive pretty long in saturated conditions. Studies in Ohio showed even up to 7 days. So actually soybeans can survive a little bit longer as emerged plants in these conditions than corn, but unfortunately our soybean crop's not as far as long as that is with the rain event we just had last night.
Are there any numbers that indicate what you might be looking at in terms of reduced stand or even yield at this point?
Yeah, reduced stands in soybeans on that 12% planted in these flooded areas, we could see a 20 to 40% reduction in stand in those areas, depending again how long that we see the flooding. Corn, it just depends. So there's several factors: the genetics, the growth stage of the corn, the soil type, the duration of the flooding. But some of the other things we have to worry about, even if it's just ponded soil, but we also had ground where water ran over or flooded from streams. So even emerged corn crops in that case, we had sediment, residue bury the plants. So again, you're going to lose those. And then we're going to run into seedling diseases, both in corn and soybeans. And so that's something we need to work with the plant pathologist when we talk about replants. Yeah. Do we need to use seed treatment? Something we learned last year when I was up in the Ewing area and those flooded creek bottoms there, is it was late enough we thought we didn't need the seed treatment to protect our plants. But we saw a lot of damping off, a lot of seedling disease in soybeans in those grounds that were replanted on these flooded soils. So, you know, as I get older, I will get a little bit more experience, and it'd be a situation that I would definitely lean towards telling producers to continue to use that seed treatment when they replant these flooded soils.
In a lot of these areas that received a lot of rain, how much is crusting going to be a problem if the plants are below the ground?
Yeah, crusting with these hard, heavy rains that we had, especially south of Lincoln where they had areas of 10 inches, crusting could be a real big problem, especially on work ground. Ground that's been tilled, we generally see more crusting issues. And so that's going to be a big problem. Not a lot of people have a rotary hose anymore to deal with that. And so there's going to be, growers need to work with their agronomist to watch the crop over the next 7 days, see what plants make it, what don't, and evaluate the need to replant.
You mentioned replant, but what about if you haven't planted the field yet? How patient do you need to be getting in there for the first time?
You know, farmers are usually a pretty good judge of when they know it's too wet or not. And so if they think it's too wet, they should probably stay out. I always ask my dad that, yeah, it's too wet, and he's planting, because we've had 5 inches in the month of April up in the Dodge County area. So if you can stay off those wet soils, those compacted problems that you get, whether it's compacted sidewalls or just compaction from the down pressure, I've seen that show up later, and we get some flash droughts later in the season. That can really hurt you in terms of yield, getting into the ground too soon after these flooded soils to plant.
On future episodes, we'll look at disease problems to corn and soybeans throughout the state. Now, filling in for the vacationing Al Dutcher, here's Stonie Cooper from the High Plains Regional Climate Center with this week's weather outlook.
Planting is stalled in the eastern two-thirds of Nebraska, and soil temps are not rising much throughout the state. Welcome to this week's weather review and outlook. Soil temps still continue to struggle, especially in the west. Most ground east of the 100th meridian is still in the low 60s, with 50s in the panhandle. Planting progress in much of eastern Nebraska is at a standstill, as some consider their ability to build an ark. Tremendous totals of over 5 inches fell across many locations here in the Amazon. The coming week shows only a few days respite from the wet. On Saturday, the northwest panhandle starts in the lower 30s and near 60 for a low by Fall City. Harrison will continue to struggle to warm with highs only in the 40s, while Nebraska City may see 78. Rain is on tap through most of the state, with the best chances of remaining dry around Niobrara. Although most chances of severe weather for Saturday should remain south of Nebraska, be aware of changing weather conditions, particularly from I-80 south. Sunday sees a near repeat in temperatures as the low tracks across the state. Mother's Day appears to be a wet one. Have your picnic inside. Lows in the 30s west, 60s southeast, rising to only low 40s in the west and upper 70s east. Sunday also carries a 15% chance of severe weather along the Missouri River corridor. The risk will heighten throughout the day as the low tracks across the state. Monday sees the wraparound on the back side of the low. Clearing in the west will allow showering to come out of their basement low temperatures in the 20s and rise to near 50. The east will be cooler as well, starting in the low 50s and rising to only near 70, with strong northwest winds. Good rain chances remain with wraparound moisture in the northeast. Tuesday would be a top 10 day if it didn't start out so cold in the upper sand hills. Upper 20s for May seems rude, and the lows in the southeast are not much better in the low 40s. There should be light winds through the western two-thirds of the state, afternoon temps 60s north and 70s south. Wednesday, we'll see some warming in the northwest, and southeast winds will start to bring moist air back to the state. A 30% chance of rain will pop up in the southwest. It looks bad, but confidence of the rain on Thursday is only 40%. Lows in the upper 30s in the northwest and mid 40s in the northeast, lows in the 50s in the south. Warming to 70s across much of the state except for the very northeast where best chances of rain reside. Friday sees a return to near normal temperatures throughout the state, although a boundary is modeled to set up from roughly Big Springs northeast to O'Neill, providing a focus for rain. Afternoon highs should be around the 60s north and west of the boundary and 70s south and east. Looking at the forecasted change in soil temperatures over the next week, abundant rain and lower temps in the east will cause some backslide in temperatures. However, warming late in the forecast should help the southern panhandle come out of the cellar. 8 to 14-day mystery forecast from the Climate Prediction Center, they're suggesting above normal temperatures for the week following May 14th. The same guesstimation is putting Nebraska at near normal conditions for 4 to 6/10 of an inch for rain for the same period.
Thanks, Stonie. Today's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, meat exports to Japan, and flooding in fields. As always, you can follow Market Journal during the week on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Next week, John Moret will be our grain market analyst, and we'll look at corn and soybean exports to Japan. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.